What's happening to our skies? Those wide expanses of blue, dotted with white cottony clouds, each unique, a story all its own. What if we told you that those skies you grew up with are rare now? Have you noticed? Look back at your old photos. You will see beautiful cobalt blue skies of years past. Those days are fewer and farther between now. Even look at advertising in today's magazines and commercials. The horizons are almost always white. Go outside and look up. The skies you are seeing today are most often composed of a hazy, bland overcast that's created from jet trails that spread throughout the sky like an opaque roof, blocking the sun. It's called climate engineering, or geoengineering. What you are about to see will shock and challenge you. Geoengineering causes climate change.
We have to keep geoengineering on the table. There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is we don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure.
The news is filled with talk of climate change, yet no one wants to talk about government programs called geoengineering, SRM, solar radiation management, HARP, or weather modification, whereby planes spray toxic chemicals into our atmosphere for the stated purpose of actually creating climate change. Yes, our government is intentionally creating climate change.
What I've decided to do is create a new form of media. It's an initiative-based documentary. SkyDer is the one that's going to make a difference. SkyDer is a 501c4 nonprofit corporation. SkyDer. You get the app, SkyDer Alert, and when you see this taking place and something doesn't look right in the sky above, just take the picture. And it automatically will send to your appropriate congressman or legislator to look up, take the picture. The photos are evidence. We need participation. We need your help. This is an initiative-based documentary. It's not just a documentary that you can watch and think about. Get the app, go on the website, send us your photos. Let the lawmakers know that you're not okay with it.
In September, Russia urged the UN to include geoengineering in the climate science report. The UK writes about this topic almost every day in The Guardian. And there are over 100 bills before the Senate today about climate science and weather modification. You no longer live in a world of blue skies and natural weather. The air you breathe, the sun you see, and the rain that falls is now being controlled and manipulated by geoengineering. In October 2013, Monsanto bought Climate Corp for $1 billion. the world's largest corporation known for genetically altering the food we eat, is now also in the business of weather and climate science. This is terrifying.
An increasing amount of days saw these patterns occurring in the skies overhead and a subsequent diminishment of my solar uptake. And it increased with every year. So about 2004 is when I really started my investigation as to what could be happening in the skies above, because it was too inconsistent. One day would be a grid pattern, and another day would be virtually nothing, with very similar atmospheric conditions. I've been studying meteorology since the late 90s as well. So clearly there was something happening, and it took no time at all to come to the geoengineering issue and a mountain of data. I researched the subject of geoengineering, which seemed to describe exactly what I was seeing in the skies above, which was solar obscuration. That's the primary goal of SAG, Stratospheric Aerosol Geoengineering, and SRM, Solar Radiation Management. The primary goal of these patents, like stratospheric Wells box seeding for reduction of global warming, is a primary patent, and the stated goal is to block the sun. And quite clearly that's what was happening with my solar PV system. So seeing the first ingredient in that patent is aluminum, I began to do rain tests. First test was 7 parts per billion, which according to a hydrogeologist was already quite high, given my location, a filtered forested location. It's not near any sort of industry, urban setting, anything. Subsequent tests over the next 5 years escalated as much as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum in a single rain test. So if you have virtually every dot connecting, and we know these materials aren't coming from China, that's the first thing many people state, but California Air Quality Resources Board has done studies on the aerosols from China, and aluminum simply is not amongst them. Metals don't float across oceans with the exception of mercury. Global dimming is a term most are not familiar with, and the latest figures show fully 20% of the sun's direct rays that reached the planet several decades ago no longer do. I mean, this is the biggest elephant in the room, absolutely the biggest in the room, and I believe that if it could be brought to a level where there was enough cover for all the scientists, all the meteorologists, all the biologists, all the academia that knows this is going on, I believe they would pour from every corner. I do, but they would have to have the cover, because I know people with California Department of Fish and Game that are absolutely beside themselves that this is going on.
Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in level pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously.
Toxicological issues show up in a lot of different ways as far as risk factors. For example, if you want to stay away from food that is pesticide residue on it, you have a choice with regard to the type of food you can eat. So you can stay away from pesticide residue, you can stay away from GMO'd food, and buy food that's either organic or from local farmers. If you have concerns about the tap water, again, you have a choice about what you can do. You can either drink bottled water, or you can filter your water. However, with regard to the aerosol schemes and the geoengineering that's going in the sky, we have no choice. We all breathe. We breathe every day. We take 16 breaths a minute. And as a result, what's being sprayed, we are inhaling. It's going through our bloodstream, and it's embedding itself in tissues. These type of particles can cause things like Alzheimer's, autism, and cancer.
The ingredients of the patents held by government contractors are composed of solutions made of toxic metals such as aluminum, barium, strontium, and manganese. High-altitude airplanes inject these solutions into the atmosphere, a process called aerosol spraying. This clandestine activity could be killing us and our planet. You can identify this easily. Just go outside and look up. You will see the trails that these jets spray often span from horizon to horizon. They sometimes appear in an unusual grid pattern or large X. Then if you really pay attention and watch them over a period of a few hours, you will see them spread out across the sky, turning a beautiful blue sky into a milky, hazy white.
The government is sovereign, and if the government of Russia or Great Britain or the United States chooses to try to slow down global warming, particularly of the Arctic, they'll have every governmental law possible to authorize it. And the liability of the collateral damage from it will be exactly that, because the other argument is to do nothing. Well, they've already said that the only way to quickly change climate, given the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, is geoengineering by changing the cloud cover to be more reflective so that the radiation doesn't get into the atmosphere. That's what they've already said. So now the only question is when.
Geoengineers now are moving very quickly to get legislation passed to spray the primary ingredients into our sky, knowing the damage that we have had not only to human health, we've seen aluminum-related illnesses go through the roof, but what free-form aluminum oxide does to our environment is devastating. And it literally destroys crops, it destroys forests, it destroys our Earth. We have an Earth that is being molested. Our ozone layer is being shredded from top to bottom.
So U.S. Title 50 was government legislation that said you cannot do open-air testing on people. But when you actually read down through the legislation and through the law, it actually has areas in which you can conduct open-air testing. It's under War and Peace, and it talks about what they can do for military purposes. So basically what they were trying to do was say that you can't do open-air testing, you can't use the atmosphere for military purposes, which is all great and dandy. You couldn't do that on the American people, which was all fine, but then they allowed for times for peaceful purposes in which they could experiment with, changing the jet stream or releasing certain chemicals to get some kind of forest sequestering, or to see if some biological agents would have a harmful effect on certain people. So all those things were allowed and are still okay because it's in times of peaceful purposes.
It's one of those pieces of legislation that sounds great on the cover and on the surface, and then when you actually read through the text of it, there's all sorts of exemptions that allow them to do exactly what the legislation says it's not supposed to allow.
Unexplainable weather phenomena, bizarre snowstorms, Hurricane Sandy, flooding, drought, tornadoes that come out of nowhere. It is not unexplainable. It's very explainable if you go online and search these words. Geoengineering, SRM, HAARP, chemtrails, Geoengineering Watch, climate science, weather modification, Skyder Alert, climate engineering, and the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, or AMEG. You will be amazed at what you find.
Chemtrails change the amount of sunlight and energy that pierces the atmosphere. I mean, it's in several articles that I can show you. So the phenomena of changing how much sun gets and energy gets into our atmosphere that heats it up is print it every day. It's just print it in such a way as to not say this is a tool for climate change. It's saying it is in fact a phenomena that will in fact change the climate by reducing the amount of sun that gets into our atmosphere. Geoengineering is one of the things that are on the table, and it'll probably be on a large enough scale that it'll be pretty obvious to everybody.
And it becomes more obvious every day. Look at the way the contrails persist and become a white blanket over the entire sky.
Essentially, a contrail is a type of cloud. It's essentially a cirrus cloud. When it persists long enough, basically what happens is it will spread out. The winds will just blow it, and it becomes basically indistinguishable from a cirrus cloud.
As a pilot, you notice contrails, and no contrail ever lasts for a half an hour or an hour even. And some of these lately ones we've been seeing, of course, they last all day.
We knew enough to know that contrails form behind the engine. It's just a byproduct of combustion of jet fuel at altitude. There's water vapor along with a few other things, and at temperatures 30, 40, 50 below zero, they form ice crystals. But then they normally dissipate.
When a contrail persists, it's persisting because the air is saturated, supersaturated for ice, which means that if any ice crystals appear in the air, then they will grow because there's moisture in the air above this certain level at which the ice will grow.
That's a normal contrail. Now the stuff that we're seeing now, that's coming right from the trailing edge of the aircraft. And it's much more intense, much more volume of material in the air. And it lasts for sometimes a day. It's not a natural phenomenon.
Look at this photograph of the sky. I thought that the clouds looked a little strange. That's why I took some pictures. But then when I saw a plane go through the cloud and leave a void in the cloud that lasted for half an hour or so. Planes don't leave holes in clouds. They're just not clouds.
When you begin to introduce clouds to the sky, you're changing how much energy from the sun reaches the Earth's surface. That's a given. You're increasing cloud cover. And we've had a marked increase of high cloud cover, in particular cirrus and altocumulus clouds over the last 30 years. The quotient, or the ratio between low clouds and high clouds, has nearly doubled the number of high clouds. And what you're doing is trapping heat. You're keeping some out, but when it comes to nighttime, you're pulling a blanket over. All right, let's just take a summer afternoon in LA. We have a high cloud bank come in. It won't come in the morning, it'll come in the afternoon. So we get all of that morning sunshine, we get all of that midday sunshine, the clouds come in, the sun begins to set in the west, the clouds thicken up. You've already got your heat in for the day. And then the clouds stick around for 70% of the night, and the heat stays. And so in late 2004, I started buying cameras. I bought 2 little webcams and then 2 other mini DV Canon cameras. Little tripods, stuck them out around the house. And then I bought 2 computers and time-lapse software. And so I could get north, south, southwest, and then east. I was hoping to catch movement of clouds, things happening with the clouds so I could deliver a better forecast at night. What I caught after 4 months in was in about 25 minutes, and I'll show it on the video, is a series of flights. And what happened was one plane was coming along, and it was a relatively dry day in April. A plane would come along and only a little bit of the trail would stick. Only a part of it would remain visible. What was curious is that another plane came along and hit precisely the middle of that segment. And I'm like, that's odd. And then another plane came along and hit the end at an angle, not bisecting or perpendicular, but off at an angle. And I thought, the light went off. There's something they're doing with geometry. It is establishing and setting up these resonances, these zones, because what I had observed with a time-lapse camera is that the atmosphere had literally been layers. Each 2, 3, 4, 5, 8,000 feet. It's probably variable from day to day. And the clouds would come up and then literally be chopped off. But that would only happen after a plane had come through. And then the storm would collapse. And you can see it today. You can step out anytime you see thunderstorms beginning to go, the planes will be there. You know, so it all comes back to the sun. The sun is the power source for this solar system. The sun drives the weather.
The stated goal of geoengineering is to block the sun, And as a result of getting insufficient light, we are not able to synthesize as much vitamin D as we need. Vitamin D has been shown to prevent things like prostate cancer, breast cancer, and colon cancer. To compensate for the lack of sun, it's definitely possible to supplement your diet with vitamin D. However, the nanoparticles that we're breathing in as a result of the aerosol schemes can potentially cause lung cancer, which, according to the World Health Organization, is the #1 cause of cancer death worldwide.
Right now I'm actually seeing 5 simultaneous jets fly over the restaurant here at High Key here in Austin, Texas. I have never seen anything like this.
You know, if you get awakened to the issue that there's something going on, maybe it's a really benevolent attempt to avert climate change, right? And even that, you could say, geez, it's kind of backfiring, right? It seems to be trapping the heat in rather than just reflecting the sun back. But let's say even if it was working, and let's say that's what the intent was, then still to be informed about what tools people are using to do that are having this kind of impact on the health and well-being of human beings and the planet, that's a legitimate request.
I spent 6 years in the Air Force as an instructor pilot in Texas. I started looking into weather modification. I found that they were trying to modify the weather beyond normal cloud seeding. And it just seemed very different to me to see these trails in the sky that weren't disappearing. You can follow a normal contrail. If you see the origin of it going across the sky, the contrail will follow it and be disappearing at the same rate as the plane is moving through the sky. But these others, they don't disappear. They expand horizontally and vertically, and they just stay there. And I said, okay, this is what it is. This is geoengineering.
In the fall of 1998, I was asked by my employer, Environment News Service, a worldwide wire service dealing with environmental issues, to have a look at a VHS videotape. When I viewed the tape, I started laughing, frankly. I thought, here's an hour and 10 minutes of shaky video footage of contrails. After 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I stopped laughing because as a former pilot and ocean navigator, I was well familiar with normal contrails, and what I was seeing on this videotape was not acting like a normal condensation trail. The trails coming out behind multiple airplanes, instead of dissipating, were lingering, spreading across the sky, until a blue sky day had turned into a murky overcast. In my first story for Environment News Service in January 1999, I said that these mysterious contrails were sickening Americans. The illness patterns coincided precisely with so-called heavy spray days, particularly on weekends. People would see this gritting, unusual activity, aerial activity in the sky. They would start to cough, they would get asthma attacks, severe enough to send them to emergency rooms. Doctors were telling the New York Times, we've never seen anything like this. People were dying in great numbers in the early days of this project, and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, went on record and said, we really don't know what this is. It's not the flu. They called it an epidemic of mortalities. That was their phraseology for this.
When is this?
This is 98, 99, and 2000, the winter months. This was reported in the United States, Canada. In Peterborough, Ontario, the hospital there had 307 acute asthma admissions in a single day. In Birmingham, England, 8,000 people died in 3 weeks, mostly elderly. It was in all the papers, BBC. They were using meatpacking trucks as portable morgues. It was very drastic. All I can say as a journalist is this was coincident to videotape and visual reports of tic-tac-toe patterns and unusual gritting in the sky. They exactly coincided. So very dangerous program.
I'm standing on the roof of my building in the Bronx, New York, And as you can see, the entire sky, as far as you can see, it's blanketed with these chemtrails. Stretching all the way over to Manhattan or to New Jersey. There's another one being made as we speak. Saturday, March 10th, 2012. It's around noontime. And look at this. You can see this chemtrail here. It almost looks as if it's falling onto the ground. You can see how it's dissipating at the very end there. Falling into the river or falling.
In October of 2013, a heavy snow event occurred in South Dakota, even though temperatures were near 50 degrees and the surrounding regions were even warmer. The unexpected snow killed over 100,000 head of cattle, costing farmers millions of dollars in losses. So how were these immutable laws of nature violated? Experts believe it was due to artificial ice nucleation. Natural ice nucleation is the freezing of water droplets around particles in clouds at very low temperatures that result in snowfall. For snow to fall at far above freezing temperatures, there must be unnatural particles for water to use as a nucleus at high altitudes where the temperature is well below freezing. This method was discovered by Vincent Schaefer and now perfected by various geoengineering patents and methods.
In regards to the Arctic and geoengineering, it appears that at this point the geoengineers are so desperate to maintain whatever ice is left in the Arctic that they are doing anything at any cost to the planet. We've seen massive high-pressure domes over the Pacific Northwest, which has literally fried us here with record temperatures for extremely long periods of time. That high pressure spins the jet stream clockwise around us, picks up moisture in the Gulf Coast, floods the East Coast as it goes up the eastern seaboard, and it appears this is directly connected to what they're trying to do in the Arctic. So in June, because of this mechanism of moisture that they are artificially ice nucleating over the Arctic, they were able to extend Arctic sea ice about the surface area. Now, one must separate the surface area from the mass, two different things. So they extended surface area 40,000 square kilometers in June, which was very anomalous, had all the scientific community scratching their heads. But 40,000 kilometers of surface area is very small in regard to the Arctic.
If we don't put an end to weather modification, you can look forward to more and more devastating storms created by geoengineering.
Geoengineers are proposing spraying 10 to 20 million tons of toxic aluminum and other substances into our sky for the stated goal of cooling our planet.
So let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter.
Weather is part of our planet, it's part of our nature. Weather drives everything. Weather drives all of our food. So yeah, weather is creation. It's part of creation, and many people call that God. And people who play with our weather or control our weather are playing God because they want power. Yeah, if you control the weather, you control the planet.
Why would Monsanto buy Climate Corp for $1 billion except to control the weather for their own purposes? There are others who have laid out strong evidence that, and it's right there in the government documents, that they want to control the weather as a weapon. Full spectrum dominance is one of the titles of one of their programs. Also, when you have heavy metals in the atmosphere, it increases the capacity of their radar devices and also of their electromagnetic antennas, like the HAARP antenna up in Alaska, is more powerful if they can bounce their beams off of the aluminum and back down to the Earth or up into the ionosphere.
There's actually a government report called Owning the Weather, where they talk about doing just that for military purposes, where they talk about how if they can create weather, it actually is an advantage to them for military reasons.
The IPCC is the organization within the WMO, and that's the international organization dealing with weather. And it basically says that climate change is human-caused and will have impacts on us now, and those impacts will become more and more significant over time.
I believe the data shows very clearly for anyone who truly does objective research that although they can cool regions, very large regions, temporarily and of course toxically, the overall effect is a much worsened warming.
The real issue in chemtrails is what causes them to be persistent. If you can cause a chemtrail to be consistent, that is persistent, that is to stay out in the atmosphere longer, so it can create a cloud. What is the mechanism for that? What has changed in that jet to cause the chemtrail behind it to persist as opposed to dissipate? Is that a natural phenomenon because we have more moisture in the air? Is it a natural phenomenon because the stratosphere is getting colder? Is it an additive that they put to jet fuel? Is it truly a chemical that they spray with the jet afterwards? The very term persistent chemtrail is used so as to indicate it's different from a chemtrail. So my question is, what's the additive? What got added to cause it to be persistent?
Our kids now are being taught that in some science classes with certain science books. The science book Essential Interactions that's put out by Centerpoint Learning Incorporated. In their section called Global Warming, they have a photo of a jet, and the photo of the jet's titled Particle Air. And it has a caption that says, jet engines running on richer fuel can add particles to the atmosphere to create a sunscreen. And that's in a section called Solutions for Global Warming. So we're even teaching our kids now that, hey, what you're seeing is normal. This is a way to, this is something to benefit you. This is something for your safety.
The most common story about chemtrails is that they don't exist. But it's just common contrails. But I have been for years, literally for a decade, asking people to show me any pictures of persistent patterned contrails prior to 1997. Haven't seen one yet. So something seems to have started up then. So then the story, the next most common story is, well, this is to protect us from global warming. We're not really doing it, but we should be doing it in order to protect us from global warming.
Questioning it does take courage these days. And so I just think that we need to step up to that, even though you'd think that that kind of questioning and concern on behalf of ourselves and our planet and our future generations would be welcomed. In fact, it's not, and you have to be a little bit uncomfortable to bring up the subject and engage new people. And what I've found is that it actually feels good, and there are many more allies than we might be inclined to think right off the bat, because when you come at it with this kind of minimum sufficient understanding that if you were being sprayed with toxic chemicals, would you be okay with that? If I could show you that that's what's happening, would you want to join with me in helping to stop it? I really don't know too many people who would say no to that.
I can say this, that for any skeptic, I would ask them, why would I not believe geoengineering is the source of this when, one, the patents describe exactly what we see in the air. The express goal is to block the sun. Two, the ingredients on the ground are exactly what those patents state as primary ingredients. Three, you have administration officials like John Holden of the Obama administration openly stating their support for geoengineering. Four, you have scientific groups like the Arctic Methane Emergency Group openly calling for emergency wartime geoengineering. It can easily be found and researched by anyone who chooses to look up the AMEG group, the Arctic Methane Emergency Group.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is the one I was referring to a moment ago. We don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means there's always a danger if you try to engineer the system on a large scale that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure with the geoengineering in the first place. There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit.
What is occurring is the deliberate and systematic alteration of the ecosystem of this planet through a physical means of injecting particulate matter, extremely fine particulate matter, into the atmosphere. I look at it at this point as a global scale operation, and I examined those questions about whether or not it was physically feasible to modify the entire atmosphere. And at the beginning, that seemed a little bit of a stretch. It was not a set answer to me at all. But you'll find when you study the atmosphere that actually it is quite feasible, and the atmosphere is much more delicate and fragile than many of us might realize.
The power of this kind of geoengineering, particularly when it's done secretly, is not only unethical, it's really lethal, and we need to stop it. We need to expose it, and we need to stop it.
I think one of the most effective things to do in connecting the dots is to really follow the money and figure out, okay, look, what are the ties between people forecasting the futures markets and people manufacturing the chemicals and making the delivery systems for the planes and owning the planes and getting the patents on, you know, aluminum resistant seats and all of that? Like, to think what's involved in this process and follow the money in it and find out who's making a profit and what's the connection, and then that'll start unraveling other pieces.
Yeah, and what are those corporations and who controls them?
Yeah.
And what's their motive ultimately?
Heating the ionosphere, injecting sulfur into the stratosphere, blocking the sun, stopping rainfall, dumping iron oxide into the ocean, bending the jet stream. While these ideas sound insane, they are very real. They are all part of geoengineering and weather modification, and they come with deadly side effects. What is happening to the bees? Have you heard about the massive fish die-offs? What about all the reports of birds dropping dead from the skies? Google these topics and you will see the peril that our ecosystem is in, and the urgent need to take action right now.
Right now, we're about 30 miles northeast of Redding, California, in a boreal forest that receives about 70 inches of rain a year historically. So we're in an area that was historically quite lush, very little mortality with the trees. And now in the last 10 years, we've seen a steadily and ever more rapid decline of various types of trees. It's a very diverse ecosystem, very biodiverse forest, but what was completely canopied forest with almost no sunlight coming through is completely different. Trees are losing their foliage, black oaks are giving up their leaves. The conditions are quite extremely different from previous years, and we have bark on black oaks burnt from the bottom to the top, completely fried off the trees, so the core wood is exposed. So we have very different conditions than we had 10 years ago.
Organically speaking, what I've seen in the local ecology over the last 2 or 3 years, this typical bark burn in its starting phases, it just looks sick, brownish, tannish. First it gets kind of discolored, and if it's a scaly type tree, it scales off. In later phases, the bark actually falls off and you've got a scar on the south side of a tree. Most fruit trees have been showing increased susceptibility to bark burn or scalding on the southern side, and that's why they paint fruit trees quite commonly on the trunk. But just lately we're seeing increased cases of that, especially where the bark is exposed to the sun. And it's getting really bad since about 2006.
Now here's dead firs right over here. Their feet are in the water. Their roots are in the water. This is not a lack of water. Let's take the examples of these trees. North-facing slope, very shaded, stream bed with water in it right now. Their feet are in the water. They're still dead. So obviously something else is going on here. I've had USDA scientists tell me off the record they know that what's killing the trees is not simply a lack of water, period. And many would say, or they try to say, that the aluminum should be in the rain, but anybody who studies that issue will realize, although aluminum is a very significant percentage of the Earth's crust, it is always bonded to other elements, usually bauxite. So aluminum does not exist in free form in the environment. It does not blow around in the rain unless it's been mined and refined and sprayed.
Scientists warn about extremely high levels of dangerous UVB radiation bombarding Earth. Could this be the consequence of damage caused by this geoengineering? Could this be what's killing trees from top to bottom? A stated side effect of geoengineering is ozone depletion. This is exactly what's happening now, and is getting worse every day.
If you just want to trust government, you can just let it all happen. But if you want to try to get a public dialogue going, I think the best thing is for state governments who are at risk to begin inquiring as to what the government is going to do. I'm just wanting the government to be truthful so that the citizens can make honest decisions about their future.
One of the things that was really impactful for me was knowing that the United States has been caught over 30 times doing toxic experimenting on human population. That's documented, it's factual. We had all of the information at Thrive in our movie fact-checked. And in order to be really responsible about what it is that we're claiming here, because once you get the facts, then you can mobilize in a more leveraged and effective way.
It sounds like a bad James Bond movie or something like that. Is, this sinister plot to control the world and depopulate and everything. But it's time to wake up and realize that there are very sinister people in the world who have risen to the top of the power centers in the government, military, corporations, media, and so forth, and they are in league with each other in overt organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, and also in secret societies, meeting even more covertly to plan exactly this type of activity.
I do not believe that it's commercial aircraft spraying this. I believe it's military covert operations that are being involved in actually not following the airways in the sky as designed for regular commercial traffic. However, they have point-to-point destinations which can crisscross. They aren't on the radar. It's being diverted over military channels, is my feeling. And that's going to be pretty hard for people to come forward and prove that.
Pictures don't lie. That's all there is to it. It's like the way the government uses red light cameras to enforce traffic violations. The photographs are evidence. It's that simple. Look at this picture of Central Park. Does this look normal to you? I mean, the coloring, the weird purples and greens and blues that are in these stripes. I remember this day, December 6th. I was walking towards the Empire State Building and I saw a plane cutting directly across the building. And I called Steve and I said, Steve, we got to take some pictures today, man. So we went out and we got these photographs, unsuspecting people just going about their daily lives. In the meantime, look up. What do you see? Does that look normal to you? I'm a director of photography by trade. That's what I do. I take pictures. I've been doing this for 20 years plus, and I can tell you what I'm seeing in the skies is different now than it's ever been.
You can't hide this. You simply can't hide this. That's why I believe this issue will be known one way or the other.
We want people to look into this. We want people to question. We want people to look into what geoengineers are denying they're doing, but state they urgently want to do.
Should the government be allowed to control the weather? Do you think you have a right to natural sunlight? Do you think you have a right to clean air and clean water?
What they had said to us at the time was that we're not going to spray over water areas and watersheds. And the fact remains is that they can't control where the mist drops. Any wind, any type of different movement, faulty GPS. They cannot say that only this particulate matter is going to fall in this particular space. They can't control that. And that is a huge flaw with this whole concept of aerial spraying.
The CDF actually did tests to see how much spray landed on exemption areas, and the gentleman from CDFA that did that actually had said that in some of the exemption areas there was just as much particulate matter as there were in the treated areas.
So do I think there's persistent contrails in the sky? Yes. On a clear day you can go up and look at them. Anybody who wants to look at them can see them. They're not short streams of cloud-like things you can see, they're very long, they go from horizon to horizon. So there isn't a question of what they are, or are they in existence? They are. The literature talks about it, including the IPCC. So the word persistent contrail is in the scientific documents where they're observing phenomena.
So I'm hopeful that as the discussion enlarges around geoengineering and the public is invited to enter the debate or enters it regardless, that chemtrails will be brought out of the closet, will be brought forward, and that the chemtrail community, the movement, can enter this discussion, and I would suggest, first of all, by dropping the word chemtrails. It's become a poison word, and we can use it as code among ourselves, for the media, for the public. We use the words of the scientists of the international debate. We call it stratospheric aerosols, which is what they are. We call it SRM, solar radiation management. We call it geoengineering. We call it climate engineering. All of those are accepted scientific terms. If we can do that, we can bring this whole chemtrails discussion into the broader discussion of geoengineering and finally have a public influence on a very dangerous program.
The public must be made aware of this assault on our planet, on our environment, on our children. Since our government leaders deny that there is a crisis, we must bring this issue to light. We must shine a light on geoengineering. Our future depends on it.
So now let's talk about what we're going to do. What can we do? What are the options?
We need public oversight, we need public disclosure, so this technology, these actions and these massive budgets can be used for the people and not against them.
The reason I'm in this battle, one that I never wanted in my worst nightmare, is because if I can't walk out my door and breathe without sucking in a lungful of toxic metals, and my children can't breathe without sucking this stuff in, I simply have no choice but to try as hard as I can to expose this issue.
There's no doubt in my mind that the spraying will have a negative impact on human health. I see cancer rates spiraling. Right now we see 1 in 2 people getting cancer in their lifetime. Already 1 in 8 women get breast cancer. I see those things continue to rise unless we do something about it.
The only power we have to put an end to geoengineering is to raise our collective voice and shine a light on this issue before it's too late.
What do you do is that there's power in numbers. We all have to work together to stop the geoengineering, and we have to do things to stop the spraying because it affects every single person on the planet that breathes. And if we don't take care of the problem, we're going to have real health issues, and that's a whole other problem.
Aerosol spraying involves a number of different mechanisms for releasing particles, types of aerosols, polymers into the atmosphere for a variety of purposes. Aerosol spraying can happen at different levels. It can happen at a high altitude level in restricted airspace that's primarily for military purposes. It can happen at maybe a medium type of level, a medium type of elevation, maybe 5,000 to 10,000 feet for cloud seeding and snow enhancement. Aerosol spraying can also happen at a low level for pesticide and agricultural use. So there's a wide variety of applications that can use those techniques.
I was having my coffee, reading the newspaper, and found out that later that day, the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the USDA were planning to hold a public meeting in Santa Cruz regarding the light brown apple moth and their plans to eradicate it, involving aerial spraying.
The aerial spray for the light brown apple moth was proposed as a 10-year program, $1 billion program to go on for 10 years, over 7 million people throughout all these residential areas throughout Northern California. And it was based on the premise that a complete comprehensive mowing of the area was needed in order to contain this so-called pest. However, places like the Pebble Beach Golf Course and a few other high-end neighborhoods were excluded from the spray. So even the basic premise of blanketing the area, except for a few spots, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. These notions that some people would just take the authority to spray a toxic spray that we're not even informed about against our will for 10 years, and we're supposed to just take it. It's like, wait a minute, what is the thinking behind that? And I want to interrupt that thinking. That's a dangerous level of entitlement.
A real turning point in the public tide of emotion about this was when a young military couple in Monterey with a new baby were doused several times with the spray, and immediately their baby started having problems. Then it got worse and worse, and they took the baby to the hospital with severe respiratory problems, and the baby almost died. And that got publicized, got in the papers and so forth.
So we found out that some of the chemicals that we had to fight long and hard to even have revealed to us, that those chemicals were in fact endocrine disruptors. And what that means is that they disrupt the reproductive cycle. And at the same time, we see human fertility going down. I know all kinds of young women having trouble getting pregnant.
Some of the stuff would cause cancer, it would disrupt our reproductive systems, have allergic reactions, it had mood-altering effects, some of these chemicals. It was a nightmare.
The notion that a corporation or a government would say, well, yes, some people are going to be harmed by this, but that's just a necessary part of, you know, kind of the fallout of something. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's question that. Why is it, and what if it happens to be your child that's the sacrificial kid?
So people started standing up and saying, no, you cannot experiment on us without our permission, without everybody's permission.
The subject of filing a lawsuit came up, and so we decided to file a lawsuit and get as many plaintiffs on board as people that felt willing to put their name on it. We had 11 plaintiffs, including 2 Santa Cruz City Council members and the mayor of Monterey, myself, and 7 other individuals. And we filed a lawsuit against CDFA and USDA in federal court in San Jose and represented ourselves. And to put a stop to the spray until environmental impact report was done.
To cut to the chase, in 6 months, we ended up stopping the entire program, $1 billion from the President and Homeland Security, with probably under $50,000, but a lot of volunteer efforts and a lot of expertise. We stopped that program cold, and it has not continued to this day. So it's a template. We were being sprayed covertly, you know, in terms of the ingredients, at 1,000 feet over 7 million people. Now, that was the moss spray. With the chemtrails, they're spraying at 30,000 feet, and they're pretty much spraying the entire globe. After nuclear radiation, it's the second most dangerous thing, I think, going on the planet, you know, in history.
I really believe that when people are informed, they will be concerned. And when they're concerned, then we can organize and take the necessary action. And I'm completely confident that we can stop chemtrails.
So what to do? We need participation. We need your help. This is an initiative-based documentary. It's not just a documentary that you can watch and think about. This is a documentary that hopefully helps you to take action with a grassroots type strategy.
We all need to watch the movie. We need to contact our powers that be in government. We need to become a voice in making a choice about stopping the spraying before it affects us personally and before it affects us globally.
Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm excited that we're all together tonight because what we're going to be talking about could be changing your life just tonight, tomorrow. When you look up in the sky, you may never look at the sky the same way again. I have a question for you. Actually, I have 2. The first is, how many of you already knew about the word geoengineering before you read about this panel? Very good, very good. How many of you had not heard of geoengineering? I was one of those neophytes just a few weeks ago, and these gentlemen changed my life. They were on my radio show. We talked about geoengineering, and just recently they came back on my radio show, and we had one of the senior scientists for Greenpeace also talking about geoengineering. And my life is different as a result of their work, and I'm so glad to introduce them to you tonight and to talk about geoengineering. I want you to feel like you're in my living room. Well, I'm happy to introduce to you our first speaker tonight. His name is Dane Wigington, And he's going to help us. He's right in the middle. Go ahead, let's give him a hand. We're going to talk about what geoengineering actually is. And so, Dane, would you share with us, what is this word? What does it mean, geoengineering?
Geoengineering is climate engineering that involves the spraying of air. It involves a number of applications of spraying aerosols into the atmosphere, of manipulating these aerosols with what's called ionosphere heaters. How many of you have heard the term HAARP? Okay, we got a pretty educated crowd here.
Great crowd.
High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. You've probably heard the term ionosphere heater. That's what HAARP is. There's not just one facility. We believe there's at least 26 ground-based facilities. There's also SBX, which are sea-based facilities too. But the bottom line with geoengineering is this: it's to try to play God with the weather, period. Many ask, why would anyone want to do this? But we should ask ourselves, why wouldn't they want to do this, given that we know those in power want to control absolutely everything. So these programs are not new. We know they go back to, on a large scale, at least to the late 40s. We have a lot, ample documentation to confirm that. So the degree to which the climate has been altered is staggering, even with a background in renewable energy, which I have. I was not aware of this issue until about the year 2000. So as I moved to the Pacific Northwest into the wilderness area, I planned on experiencing clean air coming off the Pacific, having a very large off-grid home. It was the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. Again, solar power was my background, and I still didn't know this was going on until after 2000. So when I started seeing massive grid patterns above my home that were clearly some sort of experimentation, that's what bred me onto the term geoengineering. But the bottom line is these programs are so massive, so extensive, the term itself implies a total manipulation of the Earth's climate system. And at this point, not many in this room know truly natural weather, because these programs have existed for so long. Yes, they've been ramped up recently. Big ramp-ups appear to have happened in 99, 2006, 2008. They increase these programs all the time because the more you hamper the natural system, the more the system starts to push back, and the more they try to force it further. So bottom line is, Jill, geoengineering is a total manipulation of Earth's climate systems. And right now, the degree to which that's going on between the ionosphere heaters, which manipulate jet stream, and the aerosolization of the atmosphere. We have global dimming at 22%. That's, we believe, most directly related to these aerosols. So the whole system appears to be derailed at this point, Jill.
Now, we understand from anybody who's even Googled geoengineering that there are a couple of different methodologies that are talked about in any even cursory research. The first is solar radiation management. That's one method, and I'd like for you to explain that a little bit. And then the other one is carbon sequestration, and that's a whole different methodology. So could you just give us an understanding of those two different types of geoengineering?
SRM, solar radiation management, implies blocking a percentage of the sun's incoming direct rays in order to curb a runaway greenhouse event. I believe data indicates we are already in a runaway greenhouse event, and that the ongoing SRM programs are making it worse, not better. So yes, we have carbon sequestration, but many of these are only theoretical proposals. And so what the science magazines do is they try to distract with red herrings. They talk about space mirrors. They talk about hoisting hoses from the ground with balloons to try to spray aerosols, as if we can't see with our own eyes that they're being sprayed with jet aircraft. Why would they use helium balloons to hoist a hose from the ground when they can clearly use aircraft? So these programs, you also have SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection, SAG, stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, which is the all-encompassing term. But these programs all do far more harm than any perceived good, and the scientific community right now, Jill, is doing everything they can to distract people with completely preposterous proposals like the space mirrors, like the hydrogen balloon mechanism, which I just spoke of, and like carbon sequestration, which is all theory. But all the while, we don't see any coverage, Jill, on the very, very obvious stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, which is what we see in our skies every day.
Thank you, Dane. Now we're going to talk to George Barnes, who is to Dane's right, your left. And he is a filmmaker extraordinaire. And in fact, tonight, after this panel, we're going to be seeing his film, Look Up. And for everybody who comes, they get a free copy. So that's a great value. So you don't want to miss that. Let's give him a hand just for being so generous. Now, George, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you first became aware of this issue, and then help us understand, what is the problem that geoengineering is supposed to solve? Why are we even talking about geoengineering?
Well, how I came to discover it, it's kind of funny. My background is I'm a commercial photographer. I do regular mainstream commercials and TV and films, things of that nature. And we were getting ready to film the new Volkswagen Beetle campaign. And one of the things that we were going to do was time-lapse. So I didn't have a time-lapse rig, so we rented a time-lapse rig, and I set it up outside the studio at lunchtime, just took pictures of the sky, and collected the camera at the end of the day. And when we processed the footage, because time-lapse is a series of still images, so you have to process it in a computer to be able to see it as a video. And since we were experimenting with it, we did it incorrectly, and it played backwards. So what we saw was that the overcast sky, when played backwards at high speed, was being created by these jets flying in a grid pattern over the studio. So here we are, we're in the edit suite. I'm looking at this. I said, ooh, this doesn't look right. And my editor said, what are we looking at here? And I said, I really don't know. And we have a news producer that works in the company, and I said, hey, you know, Amy, take a look, do some research. I don't know, fake clouds or grids or whatever, and just see what you come up with. She's like, yeah, this doesn't look very good, but I'll research it. And a couple days later, she came back with a 4-inch binder on geoengineering. And that was it. I said, holy cow. So that's how I came to know about it. And one of the first things that she made me aware of was there was a festival in Los Angeles the following week, and that's where I met Dane. He was one of the people that we interviewed, because at the time that I had done the initial interview, I had really very little knowledge, and just that binder on the research that she did. And we actually have a little over 10,000 hours worth of raw material, and I had two editors go through all the raw material and say, okay, you know, what are we really seeing happening in the skies? And you can identify it easily. You know, okay, some people say it's the stripe behind the airplane, but it's also the constant haze that you see on the horizon. And if you look in the in magazines, it's just the horizon's almost always white now. And we went through just thousands of hours of material, and for the southeast region of the United States, it basically didn't appear, with 3 exceptions, it didn't appear before 2006. It just wasn't there. Sky was blue. Now it's not. So that's how I came to experience it and be aware of it. And it's just the gravity and the magnitude. The more I researched it, just the more ominous and important the topic became, until I realized, okay, what can I do? What's my role? Now here it is. Here's this big ugly thing that I discovered. So what can I do for my part? And I've never been an environmentalist or an activist or politically left or right or whatever. But the one thing that I can do is I can do communications. I can make movies. I can do commercials. I mean, that is my job. That's why our film is different from a lot of the other films. It's not from the position of an activist. It's from the position of a filmmaker. So the movie looks a little bit different, and that's the best thing I could do. So everyone has to ask themselves, what can you guys all do? If you're that concerned about it, which you should be, you have to ask yourself, what can you do? And then do that thing.
And in your research, George, what was the rationale behind geoengineering? What's it for?
Well, the rationale was troubling. One, because
the most disturbing thing is that it's just unregulated. There's just no rules against it.
Does anybody watch the Colbert Report? I admit it, I'm a big fan. And just not too long ago, David Keith was a scientist who was on the, you've seen it, I see you, yeah.
That was crazy.
I even have his app on my phone, I can't get enough. But at any rate, David Keith is a Harvard scientist who was on the Colbert Report, and he has a new book called The Case for Geoengineering. So that's how mainstream this is getting. And so, Dane, I think you already knew, long before those of us in the Colbert Nation knew what the case for geoengineering was, but tell us what your research shows.
First, as far as regulation goes, I want to follow up on something that George just said. And there is no regulation for governments experimenting with their own populations. In 1976, the UN passed a resolution forbidding weather manipulation during wartime because the U.S. was so successful with weather manipulation in Vietnam that this resolution was passed, but Jill, it did not preclude these governments from experimenting on their own populations. So George is correct. But this is just a little bit more insight into this situation. In the case of David Keith is the world's most recognized geoengineer. Yes, I've been with David Keith. Some in this room may have seen film footage of David Keith and myself at a conference in 2010. They only allowed 3 questions with about 100 journalists. I was one. But the question to Mr. Keith was, with all the presentation he had done, I heard nothing of any study on human respiratory effect, environmental toxicity. He tried to dodge the question by saying, well, we studied this, and paraphrase, he said there was so much junk in the air already, a little bit more wouldn't hurt. But before they could cut me off with that question, you can see this on the film, actually you can see it on George's film, look up. But before that question was cut off, I followed up with, but that material isn't aluminum. Have you studied aluminum? And he said, let me be more careful now. We haven't studied this. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. So this is the sort of cavalier attitude that relates around this issue. They just do it and then see what happens. And again, in the case of David Keith, he appears to be just a prop in the play, pretending to present, as he did to Stephen Colbert, that this is a proposal when it's anything but. So as far as purpose, Jill, you asked the purpose they're doing this for. The stated purpose, we have about 150 patents, and the stated purpose for geoengineering is to slow a runaway greenhouse effect again. But all available data indicates we may be 2 decades into a runaway greenhouse effect right now. Geoengineering is making it worse, not better. It totally disrupts the hydrological cycle, as anybody in California knows, cuts the rainfall out. Yes, it's raining in places, but globally overall rainfall precipitation is down, should be up. In a warming planet, it must go up. The laws of physics say it has to go up, but it's not. There should be 7% more moisture in the atmosphere for every degree of warming. Why do we have less rain? There's only one explanation, because the atmosphere is full of particulates that block direct sunlight. That slows evaporation, diminishes precipitation overall. So again, when we get with geoengineering, the stated purpose to slow a runaway greenhouse effect, but we also know power and control. Ultimately, power and control. What's it always come down to? Power and control. But now they've done so much damage to the system that they appear to be trying to fix the damage, or hide the damage rather, with the same mechanism they used to create it to begin with. And we know in the case of the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, the Macondo leak, any of you know what Corexit is? Corexit, the toxic dispersant. Corexit, by some reports, made that 52 times more toxic in the Gulf. But did they care? No, because the attempt was to hide it. So now, Jill, I think much of what they're doing is simply to try to hide the full magnitude of warming. Anybody who's seen the media lately, that they try to paint the picture that the whole planet is going into a frozen state, that's a very small picture. So it appears that their marching orders now for media is to force their geoengineering to try to create this illusion of a cold planet, and the media is following suit with that. So now it appears they're simply trying to hide the magnitude of warming on planet Earth while making it worse at the same time.
Well, and as some scientists will say, that once geoengineering is begun, it needs to continue, because if they actually begin to manipulate the climate, then by stopping that process, the planet would warm exponentially more quickly than it would have otherwise. What does your research show on that?
It's called double collapse scenario. And Jill's correct. That's the message that's being put out, that once we start, we can't stop. But that is also a lie. We must stop geoengineering, or I believe we have a very bleak horizon, if any at all. So yes, there will be a climate backlash. The ozone layer disrupts the hydrological cycle. Now we have the boreal forests are literally, instead of the planet being able to respond as it would in an increased carbon environment, we would have carbon-laden rain, more precipitation. We'd have boreal forests that are thriving instead of dying. So when we're told that geoengineering must continue once we start, that is like telling a heroin addict they must continue once they start.
Interesting.
Getting off is tough, perhaps, from what I've seen. I thankfully have never gone down that road, but it must be done, correct? No matter how tough, or you will die. And that is exactly the scenario we face. If the boreal forests are not allowed to respond, right now we have a shredded ozone layer that's killing plankton. We have global plankton stocks down 50%. This should be headlines on every media around the globe. Plankton is the world's largest oxygen producer. Geoengineering is killing the planet, quite simply killing the planet very rapidly. So,
well, and it's not surprising
stop.
that it's not in the headlines. I mean,
yes.
Even the big coal ash spill in North Carolina isn't front page news today.
Correct.
And that's shocking to me.
And as far as spraying over only urban areas, we don't see that. There was a study done on 1,000 whales around the globe in 2010. They tested for inorganics at the last moment, and the study itself said jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in these whales from the most remote places on the planet.
I made this app, Skyder Alert, and that's what kind of the movie's based on. A functionality of the app is it also puts on the map on the Skyder Alert homepage where the submissions are coming from almost in real time, so it's kind of cool. So if you actually look on skyderalert.com and click on the map link, or on your home link if you actually sign up, you can see that you can see the pattern of where they're spraying around the country, and we actually we're starting to expand that into global tracking. But you can see that there is some sort of pattern, an area pattern. One day it might be heavy activity on the East Coast. Next day it might be north towards Canada. Next day it might be Midwest for a couple days. Then maybe it's California. But there's absolute patterning. So it's not that it's just happening around city centers. Just logically, what I think the perception may be, just because there's more people there, they see it. But it's actually it's in group areas in different places. So I really urge you guys to go to skyderalert.com, and I think you have to sign up to actually see where the map plot points are. But if you click on map, that is a live feed from the app users. That's just a functionality of the app. You take a picture and it plots where you are.
Yep. Just one more point to what George said. He's exactly correct. But two of the heaviest sprayed locations on the planet Earth are the poles, Antarctica and the Arctic. So one thing to keep in mind that there are
there's no people there to see it.
Right. Satellite imagery proves this. Also, there's the poles dictate life on Earth. So this experimentation we believe has been going on since at least the 50s. We have reports that show metallic particles in the Arctic that were the source. Those researchers were not able to identify the source of those metallic particulates, but all these dots connect. We believe they've been spraying that long in the poles.
Something very cool that you can all do. If you have a smartphone, this is available whether you have an iPhone or an Android. You can actually download the Skyder Alert app, and you can become a part of the solution. It allows you to take a picture. If you see patterns like what we're talking about in the sky, long trails behind jets, you can take pictures and send them directly to your federal elected officials. So if you don't have a signal now, when you do, check out in your Play Store if you have an Android, or in the Apple Store if you have an iPhone, Skyder Alert, the app, and you can start to actually populate that website. Skyder, SKYDER Alert, Skyder Alert. And you can actually begin to help populate that map of evidence on the website. Now, I want to bring to you, I'm going to get to your question, sir, in just a moment, but we've had a wonderful panelist sitting here silent, and I want to bring him into the mix. Dr. Doug Levine is actually the author of this book, Answer to Cancer. And he has dealt quite a bit with the health effects of some of the chemicals that are associated with geoengineering, some of the chemicals that are clearly outlined in some of the patents that you can see on Dane's website, which is geoengineeringwatch.org. And so I'd like to bring Dr. Doug Levine into the conversation to answer the question, how is this harmful to us? Why should each one of us care about what's going on with geoengineering? What's the human health impact?
Well, that's a good question. Hello, everybody. You enjoying? Hey, that's what I like to hear. Everybody care about health? Raise your hand. Yeah, there we go. And your kids' health and grandkids' health? Yeah, everybody, right? I'm sure people know people with asthma, bronchitis, autism, Alzheimer's, cancer. When I first met George and Dane, I was really unaware. I've kind of noticed these things in the sky, but never really kind of noticed them. So they were spraying. So I didn't know it was in the spray. So George and Dane brought to my attention the things that they're spraying in the sky. So I did some research on my own.
Just a little.
And I had a lot to read about. I want to talk about risk factors. Anybody familiar with the term of risk factor? Okay, a risk factor is anything that will increase your risk of getting a problem. There are two types of risk factors. There is modifiable risk factor and a non-modifiable risk factor, and I'm going to explain the two. If you are a smoker and you're smoking, you have the potential of getting lung cancer, right? That is a modifiable risk factor, meaning that is a behavioral change that you can make to stop smoking and reduce your risk of getting cancer. Another modifiable risk factor is eating bad food, right? If you eat, you heard the term garbage in, garbage out. So if you eat bad food, over time that's going to make you sick. So you can modify your risk factor of getting sick by eating healthier. That is a modifiable risk factor. Geoengineering is a non-modifiable risk factor. That is a risk factor that is affecting our human health that we have no control over. There are other non-modifiable risk factors that we have. Obviously, my specialty is cancer. If you're a woman, you have 100 times greater risk of getting breast cancer than a man. Obviously, African American men have a higher risk factor of getting prostate cancer. These are non-modifiable risk factors you can't do anything about if you're a man or a woman. If you're African American or Caucasian, you can't do anything about your age because the older you get, the higher your risk factor of getting cancer. So it's to understand that this is a non-modifiable risk factor, and as a result of being a non-modifiable risk factor, it affects everybody. Because the sky is the biggest room in the house, and what they're spraying is going into our water, it's going into our soil, it's going into our food, and we are breathing it in. Everybody understand the difference, right? All right. All right.
So what are some of these compounds or chemicals?
Well,
and what can they do to us?
Well, Dane and I were talking earlier, and actually George and I were talking on the plane. Everybody hears about aluminum, right? Dane was saying to me, which is true, and correct me if I'm wrong, that aluminum does not occur in the environment by itself. Is that correct?
Does not occur in the environment naturally in free form. It is always bonded to other elements.
That's correct. So what's happening is that they are, if I'm not mistaken, spraying aluminum in the sky. Aluminum has neurotoxicity. That means it affects the nervous system. It has a real affinity to the nervous system. And that's why you hear stories about kids that have autism, people with Alzheimer's. When they do tests on these people, they find they have high elements of aluminum. So aluminum will not only affect neurotoxicity, it will change cognitive behavior, motor function, sensory function, and it is embedded in your tissue. It does have an affinity for bone, teeth, but it actually goes to pretty much every organ of the body. So it is a huge problem. And then they're starting to get into problems like nanotechnology. Anybody ever heard the term nanotechnology? Really, it's basically it means that they're trying to make the particles really, really small. And when they make the particles really, really small, it goes to a cellular level. Our bodies are made up of hundreds of millions of cells. We have billions of chemical reactions going on every second. What they found with nanoparticle aluminum is that when it's in your body and it comes in contact with a cell, it changes what's called the permeability of a cell. A cell has a free flow of sodium and water and potassium going in and out of the cell. What happens is that aluminum shocks the permeability of the cell wall, and what happens is that it leaves the cell inert. And as a result, the cell starts to die. It can also mutate. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing aluminum at a nanoparticle toxicity affecting the health of the body. So this is why this is a non-modifiable risk factor. This is why it affects everybody. And once it's in the body, it can come out, but it's a lot of work. Any questions? Wow, I love this. Go ahead, yeah.
1 second.
Aluminum, barium, strontium, those kinds of things.
Yes.
The quantity that you would need to find it in whales in the Arctic, to find it everywhere in farmland, the quantity of minerals is spectacular.
Okay.
So the cost of mining, the evidence of mining, is that not something we can trace? I mean, this is the biggest chunk of metal ever. You know,
Dane, you have an answer to that
where
question?
does that come from?
I would like to answer that. In fact, if we refer to David Keith's original proposal, which is backed up by other geoengineering studies, to put 20 million tons annually into the air. This is an incomprehensible amount of metal. And again, the cavalier attitude to which they made these proposals in the conference, which I mentioned earlier, it's staggering to imagine that they're not even addressing this question. But after the Cancun Climate Conference and the Copenhagen Climate Conference, we saw aluminum futures go through the roof after both of these conferences, which is an indicator that there were a lot of backdoor deals made. A lot of countries were forced, strong-armed, or otherwise leveraged to sign on to geoengineering. That's why we saw a lot of the renewable energy programs in various countries dropped, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to block the sun and put up solar panels. So the amount of metal, yes, is staggering, and we see these companies profiting in spite of the fact that industrial production is going down. Why is aluminum still
See, strontium has characteristics very similar to calcium, and what it will do is it will actually displace the calcium in bone. So it's doing these things without any symptoms. So all of a sudden people start to run into things like, you know, osteoporosis, fractures, that type of thing. And there is, you know, there's a certain health risk of it. For all people all the time, no. But the people that are sensitive to it, absolutely.
And then it's too late.
Yeah, good.
Some more questions? I believe I saw, yep, go ahead and we'll work our way around.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the presentation. You may have already answered this question in a different way, but when you're talking about it, the chemicals invading the cellular structure, that's also then when the nanoparticles would be getting into the blood-brain barrier?
That is a very good question, and yes, because aluminum specifically likes the nervous system. It has a real neurotoxicity into the nervous system. So you have to think about olfaction when you breathe in. That has a direct line right to the brain. So you're breathing in these nanoparticles, and they're embedding themselves into the brain and the nervous system, which is predominantly what? It's predominantly fat. So they're embedding themselves in there, and now you're going to have problems with neural synapses, and that's why you start to see cognitive changes. You start to see functional changes in people. When they do autopsies on people that have Alzheimer's, very high levels of aluminum, and the person doesn't even know they're there. So what's happening is that we're being exposed to this, and that's why when George invited me, it's not just an environmental problem, it's a health problem that people don't even realize. And I don't know about you, but I'm trying to reduce my risk of getting sick. I don't mind getting older. I just don't want to suffer and have all these sorts of health problems. But this is a huge problem that needs to stop, and it cannot be done with one person. It needs to be done with everybody. And that's why people just need to support what he's doing here. People need to get the app. People need to donate to the nonprofit, tell a friend, buy the DVD, whatever it takes, because it has to stop, because you're going to start to see more and more people getting sick over time. And you know, the body just doesn't lose its ability to adapt. The body just doesn't lose its ability to regulate itself. All of a sudden, when did the body start having problems regulating itself? The body's been around for like 1 million years. So there's got to be risk factors that are affecting the body. And one of those risk factors is that.
And I just want to say, Dr. Levine, if folks want to know if they've got this toxicity in their system, you have a solution. You don't have to be ignorant to this fact. There is a way to find out.
You can have your blood checked for heavy metals, aluminum, lead, mercury. There's blood tests for that. Another simple, less expensive is a hair test. Basically, it's taking a lock of your, anybody hear of hair analysis? You aware of it? Right, it's been around a long time. They do drug testing for hair analysis. Basically, they take a piece of your hair, it gets sent to the lab, they do whatever the lab does, and as a result, you can find out if you've been exposed to things like cadmium, aluminum, barium, and mercury, lead, all these things, all these toxic, and you can see where you are on that range, and then you can work out that proper protocol, whether it's by supplementation, chelation therapy, to just pull the stuff out of your body.
Well, Dr. Levine did a hair test on me, and I think my stylist is going to be like, what did you just do? But it really doesn't take that much. Can you tell that I cut some out? Because I had to cut out a little bit. But what doesn't hurt, and it is very inexpensive. You can do that.
It just snowed in New Jersey. So George shot me an email, and he goes, check the snow. Like, check the snow. So I went outside, and I made a snowball. And I took a butane lighter, and I lit the snowball, and the snowball did not melt. It burned.
Yeah.
It burned.
It's true.
And then I'm saying to myself, okay, this is going into my reservoir, this is going into my food supply, this is going into my groundwater, and this is not good. So I had other people try it elsewhere, yes? You had other people try it elsewhere?
That's how it came. It came to the Skyder site. People just posted links, the snow's not melting.
It did not melt. It evaporated.
Google non-melting snow in Atlanta. Just Google it when you go home.
It's important.
It just doesn't melt.
It's important to remember that, this is Doug's report, George's are absolutely accurate, but it's important to remember that conditions are absolutely not uniformly the same.
Right.
So when you have somebody that hops on YouTube and say, hey, I melted my snowball, it's fine, everything's okay, maybe it is for them, depending on where they're at. But that does not mean that this artificially nucleated snow does not exist. It's called an endothermic reaction. When you mix certain chemicals together, you get an endothermic reaction, which absorbs heat and energy. When you mix barium hydroxide, for example, with ammonium, you can drop temperatures in a lab beaker 100 degrees on the spot. So we know barium's in the mix. We know that. We've identified lead, aluminum. Also the polarization of a particle. The smaller the particle, in the case of a nanoparticle, like what Doug mentioned, and he has this absolutely accurate to a T. The reason they use such small particles is because it creates a greater volumetric forcing for climate forcing. That's desirable for the geoengineers. The smaller the particle, the greater the climate forcing they can create with it. They don't care about the consequences. So that's why the nanoparticles are used. Horizontal gene mutation, we've been told by Norwegian and German researchers, exactly like Doug stated, that not only is it contaminating the food, not only is there no organic food at this point, but it's creating, it's horizontal gene mutation is occurring. So this is, the ramifications here again are absolutely cataclysmic. So
give you a two-word answer to your question, because this is easy to remember. Climate change. That's the case for geoengineering. Climate change. And it all boils down to that. I'm going to get to all the questions. I'm having a Merv Griffin moment here, so I'm having a good time. But give me a chance. I'm going to go in order and sweep the room, so I'll get to everybody. Hold on just a sec.
Thanks, Jill. And thanks to everybody. I think we started going down this road, but I know that everyone here is concerned about what can we do in the interim in terms of mitigating those risk factors. Dr. Doug, I know that you've started to address that, but are there some things that we can do?
I'll tell you what I do. Obviously, I have water coming into my home. It's filtered. So if there's any contamination of any water, obviously the filtration system's doing the best it can. I don't want to spend my whole life walking around with a surgical mask. And
what about detox methods?
Sure. Yeah, chelation therapy, those are radical. I mean, yeah, things like, chlorella, things like that, algae designed to, they get the term chelation from the Greek word, which means claw. So it's basically designed to chelate, to pull these heavy metals out of your body, and either you urinate it out, defecate it, whatever, you do to get rid of it. But these things have no physiological benefit to the body. This is the problem. There are metals that do have a physiological basis. That's why you see, for example, when you get a cold, they do, take the zinc lozenges, right? Well, zinc is used as a metalloenzyme, and it's an immunomodulator, and that's what zinc does. But barium doesn't. Barium is toxic and wreaks havoc on the kidneys.
He's looking at me. It came up on my hair test. I don't know where the barium came from.
I would like to back up a little bit about what Doug says, because I appreciate that the honesty in his answer, that it's imperative we stop these programs, because there's a lot of people that are giving advice that seem to divert the public's attention away from stopping the constant exposure. And I believe that's what Doug's focusing on. And I support him completely in that statement, that no matter what we do, if we don't stop the constant exposure, then it won't matter for long. It won't matter for long. It's certainly good to do along the way to try to retain our cognitive function so that we can effectively address this fight. But I appreciate his honesty in making clear the point.
Power in numbers. There's power in numbers.
We must stop the exposure.
All right.
It'll stop.
We're gonna take some more questions, but I'm gonna ask one, if I can be so bold. I want to ask each one of our panelists if, let's say, the United States representatives on the Science and Technology Committee called you up tomorrow and they said, Dane, what should we do? What laws should we write? What regulations should we put in place? What should we do? What would you say?
If I could have anything implemented by anybody legislatively, it would be simply that you cannot do anything but harm these natural systems. You can only harm them. And even the simple notion of cloud seeding for rain that everybody seems to accept, if rain falls in one place, it obviously didn't make it somewhere else. These systems are hugely complex. To affect even a small part of the system is to affect the whole system. But in fact, what they've done now is completely dismantle the system. So Jill, it would be just the bottom line is nobody has the right to play God with the planet's life support systems.
These are toxic elements. These things have no physiological function in the body. They make the body sick. And the problem I'm having with modern day medicine is that a lot of medical doctors will not take a look and take this type of toxicology seriously. So this is George's head, and he has they found things, and just to give you an overview, all these things should be zero. You shouldn't have any of this in your body, and if you do, you should have very, very small amounts, trace amounts. Yeah, aluminum, antimony, arsenic, barium, beryllium, bismuth, cadmium, lead, mercury, platinum, thallium, thorium, uranium, nickel, silver, tin, and titanium. So all these things can be found in your hair. So as I was explaining to Jill early on, hair is an excretory tissue. Our hair on our head, our follicles, come in constant contact with our bloodstream. So when the body is noticing something that it doesn't want to be in your body, it will deposit it in your hair. So hair becomes now almost a disposal for the toxic metals that are in your tissue. So George has extremely high levels of these toxic things, and we're kind of working with him to kind of get rid of it. So understand that these things have no physiological benefit to the body. We do have trace amounts that the body can tolerate. However, it gets to a point when the body can no longer tolerate it, and as a result, it starts to throw off other functions of the body. So people won't equate things like a thyroid problem or a problem with their adrenal glands or a problem with their blood sugar with being exposed to these toxic elements. So where are we getting these toxic elements from? We're getting it from the food. We are getting it from water. We are getting it from man-made products. And now we have another elephant in the room, which is the spraying that's going on every single day.
This is an avalanche on top of any other source. And we're talking about enough metals being dispersed to change the pH of the forest floor. That takes a lot of metal. In the Pacific Northwest, we've seen I have USDA soil studies for our region, baseline studies, so we have a solid basis point to determine this. We've seen soil pH changes 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. Try to imagine how much metal it takes to change the pH of the forest floor. That's how much we're breathing. So we're not talking about adding this to your list of just one more source of metals. We're talking about something that's exponentially larger than all other sources combined, period.
I have a question regarding ocean iron fertilization. I'd like to know what it is and what it does.
Iron fertilization has already been done. In fact, it was done by some people in sort of a rogue experiment. And this is an attempt to cause an algae bloom to suck up CO2 into the ocean. It creates an anoxic zone. It kills that section of the ocean. But, you know, like a lot of our modern mentality, they don't seem to take the consequences into account. So right now we have 400 dead zones, 400 plus around the planet, as big as 10,000 square miles. Oxygen content in the ocean is dropping rapidly, but that's what that is simply an attempt to pull carbon out of the atmosphere by creating an algae bloom in the ocean, but extreme consequences there.
Well, and actually, if you wanted to learn a little bit more about this as well, as I mentioned, we just recently had a show on Go Green Radio. If you Google Go Green Radio, that's my show. One of the guests that we had on that couldn't be with us today was Dr. David Santillo. He is a senior scientist for Greenpeace, and his specialty is marine biology, and this is something that he has written about. And so if you Google David Santillo, Greenpeace senior scientist, you can find some of the papers that he's written about this as well. Just, I want to kind of back up a little bit because in my, other job, I'm a mom of 3, and so sometimes I find myself having to explain these issues to my kids. So let me give you the layman's version of what's going on here. We all know that we're burning oil and natural gas and coal. And these are hydrocarbons that were buried under the ground for millions of years, right? All that carbon under the ground. We're bringing it above ground, burning it, and introducing that carbon into our atmosphere. And everybody's going, no duh, right? Well, the Earth has a natural carbon cycle. And we have mechanisms, natural mechanisms, to deal with this carbon, to sequester it, to pull it out of the air. Some of those mechanisms are wetlands, forests, vegetation of all kinds. Well, at the same time that we've been bringing all these carbons up out of the ground, we've also been doing away with some of the Earth's natural sequestration capabilities. We've covered over wetlands. We've deforested. We've asphalted over so many things. And as a result, the Earth's carbon cycle's out of balance. There's more carbon in the atmosphere. Well, we're left with one huge capability, natural capability for the Earth to sequester carbon, and that's the ocean. The problem is that as the ocean works overtime to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, that becomes carbonic acid when it's in dire amounts. And that's why you hear about the acidification of the ocean, which of course is very bad for marine life, very bad for coral reefs, and that's why we're talking about that. Now, this idea of iron fertilization of the ocean, well, that's just one more way to increase the ocean's capability to absorb CO2. But again, we know that that can cause ocean acidification. and in the process, damage marine life, damage coral reefs. We even use that for cancer medications. So that's what we're talking about there, in layman's terms. So I hope that's helpful.
I want to talk about one thing, and there's one thing that we didn't talk about, and for me it's been like the elephant in the room. There's been talk about toxic elements, toxicology, aluminum, barium, strontium, these lead, mercury, all these things that we're being exposed to. And I think Dane will go with me here on this. Everybody notices, and I certainly do in New Jersey, New York area, there is a hazing every day. We never see a blue sky. I remember the last time I ever saw a cloud. There is a hazing every day, and as a result of the hazing, it affects the skin's relationship to the sun. And people will say, okay, what's the big deal about the skin's relationship to the sun? And you know exactly what I'm going to bring up. You're exactly right. Vitamin D. Vitamin, what's the big deal about vitamin D? You know, you hear some things about vitamin D. And vitamin D does more than I think any other vitamin in the body. And I just want to talk about that for 2 minutes, and then you can do the question thing. So basically what happens is that when the sun hits the skin, there's a chemical reaction, and then there's a series of other chemical reactions where 25-hydroxy vitamin D is made in the liver, then that is sent to the kidneys to make 1-dihydroxy vitamin D, which is the active form of vitamin D. Vitamin D is used for calcium absorption. It keeps your bones strong. But people don't realize that vitamin D is also an immunomodulator. Basically what that means is that there's so many cells in the body that have receptor sites for vitamin D. And there's a ton of receptor sites in the breast, in the prostate, and in the colon. So if you don't have adequate amount of vitamin D going through your body doesn't really know what to do, and it affects the genetic makeup of those cells. And as a result, they found that people with low vitamin D intake have a higher risk for colon cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer. So, you know, you look at that dimming, and 75% of Americans do not get an adequate amount of vitamin D, and people will say, well, you know, I'll just supplement my diet with taking, you know, whatever, 1,000 units of vitamin D every day. Well, that's all well and good, but I'm like everybody here. I care about the environment. I care about the planet. I want the sun back, and I want to experience the sun the way it should be experienced. So if there's one factor that I think is important for people is making sure that vitamin D level is exactly where it needs to be, because it has a tremendous impact on human health.
Yes, Ms. Colbert Nation, over here.
I know, I was so stoked when he did that. Okay, well, I've been documenting the sky in LA for almost a year now with daily photos, and a lot of the clouds, the artificial clouds I see, they come in even when there is not active chemtrail spraying. So, you know, a lot of people have sent me photos too. I do a blog where I post these pictures, and, you know, the grid pattern is something everybody knows about. I see a lot of, obviously, aerosol clouds coming in. They can come in from the west. They can also come in from the north or south against the wind. You know, our normal weather comes from the west. And I was wondering if you could speak more about other methods of deployment of aerosols, because I think they put a way larger amount much quicker into the atmosphere out over the ocean where we don't see it.
You're exactly correct. There's an acronym called CARE. It's quite a deceiving acronym, but it's Chemical Aerosol Release Experiment. It's a detonation of canisters, and this is an aspect of these programs. So there are more forms of disbursement, and often when these aerosols are dispersed, yes, this is a very good point that's been brought up. Don't think because you don't see horizon-to-horizon trails that you're not being sprayed. You shouldn't see anything behind most aircraft unless it's the dead of winter and they're in the highest elevation. It should be the shortest-lived, almost transparent trail. So these bright, shorter trails that appear to dissipate, you'll see the sky becomes more and more silvery white. These aerosols blow over tremendous different distances, and there are different forms of dispersal. So the bottom line is if the sky is not blue and the clouds are not white, You see this cobwebby, hazy substance above you. Those are aerosols, and they're so prevalent now that they're even naming these aerosol clouds in books as if they're some natural phenomenon. This is part of the conditioning of society. NASA has kids programs to teach them that these clouds are normal, natural, and innocuous. So, bottom line is that these programs were laid out in a way that they obviously intended to continue this for a very, very long time.
I want to ask you guys a question. How many of you have told friends or family about chemtrails? And what do they say? Oh, those are just contrails. Gentlemen, what should we say when we get poo-pooed that way?
We have film footage of these aircraft spraying at altitude, argument over. I mean, we have up-close, personal, very clear shots of these aircraft spraying. Now, when people start to deny at that level,
where can they find them? Just tell us. Yeah.
Go to geoengineeringwatch.org. We have a half a dozen of the best videos posted on our front page. So that's the end of the argument. We have films of the crime being committed, period. If somebody doesn't want to believe it after that, then that's just called denial. There's not much you can do about that.
The things that you'll find, and I'm not saying to rush right out and buy anybody's book, but David Keith makes the argument when he makes the case for geoengineering that the alternative, climate change run amok, is so much worse than what they predict the human health effects of geoengineering will be, that it's kind of heck if you do, heck if you don't. And so, that may not be a great answer, but it is the answer that you'll hear from those who are proponents. There's no mention of that in the proponents' documentation. None of them are talking about population control. They are talking about climate change. Now, if there are some documents we can't access, I don't know. But the ones that you can access, that's what they will tell you, that they are alarmed at the rate at which the climate is changing, and that is the reason for their pushing forward with research, deployment, what you choose to believe on that. So that is their rationale. That's the official line.
It's a very important aspect that's been brought up. Thank you for the question. And that is this: why don't we hear from people within academia about this issue? I personally spoke to NOAA scientists about 18 months ago that told me, quote, I quote verbatim, "We're alarmed as hell about these programs." She spoke about her immediate circle. "We don't have any First Amendment protection. We don't know what to do." I know people within California Department of Fish and Game who know. I know people in USDA who know. They're afraid. They're simply afraid to speak out. They need to have enough cover in order to come out of the shadows. But this is back to my point. If we could reach critical awareness of exposure in this issue, I think you would see the dam break from 100 different directions.
Couple things I want you to know. First of all, this is not a conspiracy theory. There's plenty of mainstream information out about this. This is a hot topic. And in fact, in 2010, the United States House of Representatives Science and Technology Committee held a public hearing on geoengineering back in 2010. So they were already talking about it. They're going to be talking about it again. In the same year, 2010, the UK House of Commons Science and Technology Committee passed some regulations. They were thin. Greenpeace isn't pleased with them, but they actually tried to begin dealing with geoengineering through a legislative means. This isn't going to be news to your representatives. They're talking about it at the UN. They're talking about it in Congress. Even some of the most conservative, right-leaning, politically think tanks now have papers out. If you look at the Cato Institute, the Hunter Institute, and others. Some of the same folks, interestingly, that told us a couple of years ago that climate change wasn't real, now say geoengineering might be a good way to deal with climate change. I don't know what happened there, but at any rate, this is something that is being discussed. And so if you discuss it, you can invite your friends over, pop some popcorn, show them the video, and pass it around. We talked earlier about getting out on skyderalert.com, S-K-Y-D-E-R, alert.com. Also downloading the app and starting to add your photos of the sky where you live to the collection of citizen data. Be a citizen scientist. I mean, everybody who's been talking about public education and the value of a well-educated electorate have told us that this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be well educated enough here in America to participate intelligently in our democracy. So this is one great way to do that. All right, let's give some appreciation for them.